Before we dive into today's disturbing cases, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you'll want to be here for every upload. And smash that like button because it genuinely helps this content reach more people. Now, let's begin. We live in a connected world. News travels fast. A celebrity sneezes in Los Angeles, and within minutes, people in Tokyo are talking about it. A political scandal breaks in London, and by breakfast time, it's trending worldwide. But here's something most people don't realize. Despite all this connectivity, despite the internet breaking down borders, there are still crimes that remain locked behind invisible walls. Stories that dominate headlines in their home countries, but never make it past their borders. Today, we're breaking through those walls. We're going to explore 4 disturbing cases that you've probably never heard of. Cases that will challenge everything you think you know about justice, about human nature, about what people are capable of when they believe they can get away with it. These aren't your typical true crime stories. These are the ones that got buried under language barriers, cultural differences, and limited international reporting. And I'm warning you now, what you're about to hear is going to stay with you long after this video ends. So take a breath. Make sure you're ready, because once we start, there's no going back. Let me paint you a picture. September 13th, 2025, Hanoi, Vietnam. The morning sun is already beating down on the streets. Scooters weave through traffic like a metal river. Horns blend into that distinctive urban symphony that defines Southeast Asian cities. Among the thousands of commuters that morning was a 15-year-old girl named Wen Ha. She's riding her electric motorbike, a gift from her parents, but not just any gift. This bike represented sacrifice. Her family was poor. They'd saved for months. They'd even borrowed money they didn't have just to buy it. Why would they do that? Because Wen Ha had just been accepted into her dream school. This bike meant she could get there every day. It meant education. It meant opportunity. It meant a future that might lift her entire family out of poverty. They'd celebrated. They'd allowed themselves to hope, to believe that better days were finally coming for their daughter. But Wen Ha never made it to her second week of classes. At 9:20 in the morning, while passing beneath the Van Em Bridge, a concrete mixer struck her motorbike. The impact sent her and her bike skidding across the asphalt. Witnesses saw it happen. A traffic accident. Unfortunate, yes. Tragic, absolutely. But an accident nonetheless. These things happen on busy roads. What happened next, however, wasn't an accident. What happened next was a choice. A calculated, cold-blooded choice that would shock an entire nation. The truck driver stopped. He got out. He checked on Wen Ha, and he realized she was still alive. She was injured, yes, possibly badly, but she was breathing. She was conscious. Help was on the way. This is the moment where most human beings would do everything in their power to save her, to help her, to call for an ambulance, to pray, to hope. This driver did none of those things. Instead, he got back in his truck. He put it in gear, and he deliberately drove over her body, dragging her beneath his wheels along the asphalt. Let that sink in for a moment. A 15-year-old girl lying injured on the road, and a grown man made the conscious decision to ensure she died. Witnesses later described the scene as something from a nightmare. They said the young girl was nearly torn in half. People rushed to pull her from beneath the truck, desperately trying to save her life. Someone called for help. She was raced to the hospital, but the damage was too severe. Within hours, Wen Ha was pronounced dead. That evening, something almost as shocking happened. The truck driver, 51-year-old Din Van Long, calmly walked into the local police station. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He turned himself in, and when the police questioned him, he confessed. Not just to hitting her, but to deliberately killing her. His reasoning? Vietnamese law. You see, in Vietnam, if Wen Ha had survived, Long would have been responsible for her medical treatment. Every surgery, every medication, every therapy session, every cost associated with her recovery for the rest of her life. But if she died, he'd only owe her family a fixed compensation payment, a one-time fee, cheaper, simpler, more convenient. So he killed her. He actually told police this. He explained his cost-benefit analysis like he was discussing a business transaction. The officers thought he had to be joking. They assumed he was on drugs. They ran toxicology tests expecting to find alcohol, methamphetamine, something to explain this insanity. The tests came back clean. He wasn't impaired. He wasn't intoxicated. He'd made this decision with full mental clarity. Now, before you think this is just one psychopath, understand something. In Vietnam, there's a rumor that circulated among drivers for years. They call it the underground law of the road. The idea is simple. It's cheaper to kill than to let live. A survivor means lifelong financial responsibility, medical bills that never end, disability payments, lost wages, public shame. But a fatality? That's just a one-time payout, usually a traffic citation instead of serious criminal charges. And here's the truly disturbing part. This isn't just dark folklore. There have been documented cases where drivers deliberately dragged accident victims to their deaths, and many received nothing more than traffic-related sentences. So when Din Van Long crushed Wen Ha beneath his wheels, he wasn't inventing a new strategy. He was following an established playbook, a grim calculation that some drivers have been making for years. If you're feeling sick right now, good. You should be. But stay with me, because this story gets worse before it gets better. The public reaction in Vietnam was explosive. People took to social media demanding justice. Wen Ha's story spread across the country like wildfire. News outlets picked it up. International media started paying attention. The case became a symbol of everything wrong with the system. A system where a human life could be reduced to a line item on a balance sheet, where someone could literally calculate the cost of murder and decide it was worth it. Before we continue, I need to remind you to hit that like button if you're finding this video informative. It genuinely helps the algorithm show this content to more people. And subscribe if you haven't already. Now let's talk about what happened next in Vietnam. Din Van Long was charged with premeditated murder, not vehicular manslaughter, not negligent homicide, murder, and prosecutors made it clear. They were seeking the death penalty. They argued that this wasn't a traffic accident that spiraled out of control. This was an execution. A 15-year-old girl murdered because her life had been assigned a price tag, and that price was too high for her killer to pay. The trial hasn't happened yet as of this recording. Long is being held in detention, but if convicted, he could face Vietnam's harshest penalty: execution by firing squad or lethal injection. Wen Ha's family is devastated. This girl wasn't just a daughter. She was hope. She was the future. She helped around the house without being asked. She cared for her younger sibling. She never spent money needlessly because she understood how hard her parents worked. She'd told friends she wanted to help her family, to make life better for them, to repay the sacrifices they'd made. She never got that chance because in the mind of a truck driver doing math on the side of the road, her life had a value, and he decided he wasn't willing to pay it. Now, you might be wondering, how can a society let something like this happen? How can there be an actual incentive structure that encourages killing accident victims? The answer is complex. Vietnam, like many developing nations, has a legal system that's still evolving. Traffic laws are often enforced inconsistently. Compensation amounts aren't standardized. Insurance is still relatively new and not universal. So when someone causes an accident, the financial burden often falls directly on the individual, and that creates a perverse incentive. If you hit someone and they survive with serious injuries, you could be paying for their care for decades. But if they die, the financial obligation is capped. This isn't unique to Vietnam, by the way. Similar patterns have been reported in other countries with developing legal systems. But what makes Wen Ha's case so significant is that it's finally forcing the conversation. It's making people confront the reality that these rumors weren't just rumors. They were real. And they resulted in real deaths. Real families destroyed. Real futures stolen. Some activists in Vietnam are now pushing for legal reforms. They want mandatory insurance. They want standardized compensation that doesn't create this sick incentive. They want serious criminal penalties for anyone who deliberately harms an accident victim. And most importantly, they want the culture to change. They want drivers to understand that the life of a 15-year-old girl is worth more than the cost of her medical bills. But will it change? That remains to be seen. Legal reform takes time. Cultural shifts take even longer. And in the meantime, families like Wen Ha's are left to grieve, to wonder if their daughter's death will mean anything, to hope that maybe, just maybe, her story will save the next girl on a motorbike. Let's shift gears now, from the streets of Hanoi to the artistic underbelly of St. Petersburg, Russia. This is a story about fame, control, and what happens when the person who's supposed to love you sees you as nothing more than a product to be exploited. Her name was Anastasia Kumlovskaya. Online, people knew her as Nastia, or by her artistic name, Gishman. She was born in 1996 into circumstances most of us can't imagine. Her father abandoned the family. Her mother struggled to keep them housed. For years, they were technically homeless, sharing a bed in a hostel, scraping by on whatever work her mother could find. Eventually, her mother had to move cities for employment, and Anastasia was sent to live with her paternal grandmother. That grandmother saw something special in the girl: talent, creativity, an artistic soul that needed nurturing. So she bought her paints, encouraged her to create, and controversially, when Anastasia was just 15, took her to get her first tattoo. From that moment on, Anastasia embraced a philosophy: I am the canvas. Her body became her portfolio. By the time she turned 18 and could legally get tattooed without parental consent, she was already covered head to toe in ink. Elaborate designs, dark imagery, body modifications that set her apart from everyone else. She studied computing and automotive mechanics in college. Practical skills, but what she really wanted was to be seen, to matter, to escape the poverty that had defined her childhood. Social media gave her that opportunity. She adopted the name Gishman and started posting photos of her tattoos, her body modifications, her cosplay work, and people loved it. Her follower count grew. 300,000 people across TikTok, VK, and Instagram. She wasn't just posting photos though. She was building a business. She sold art prints. She offered tattoo appointments. She taught courses in design and computing. She was actually making it, actually escaping the life she'd been born into. Eventually, she earned enough to move into her own apartment in St. Petersburg. Independence, freedom, success. But success attracts predators, and Anastasia was about to meet hers. Now, Anastasia understood that maintaining an online presence required consistency. She posted every single day, new photos, new content, always giving her fans something fresh. So when that steady stream of content suddenly stopped in early August 2022, people noticed. At first, her account still seemed active, but the posts were old, recycled content from months earlier. Nothing new, nothing current. Concerned friends reached out via text and private messages. The responses they got were strange, vague, detached. "I'm feeling sick. I don't want to talk right now. I'll be back soon." It sounded like her words, but something felt off. Taking matters into their own hands, Anastasia's loved ones called the police on August 10th. They requested a welfare check. When officers arrived at her apartment, they were immediately hit with a smell. That unmistakable, sickening odor of decomposition seeping from under her door. They forced their way inside, and they found Anastasia's body in the bathtub. She'd been stabbed over a dozen times, first in the bedroom, based on the blood evidence, then dragged to the bathroom, where she'd been left to decompose in the summer heat for approximately a week. The police initially considered several theories. A break in gone wrong, a deranged fan. But they didn't have to investigate for long. Within 24 hours, they had their main suspect in custody, Dmitry Chernyshov, Anastasia's 24-year-old husband. They found him hiding in a nearby motel. And here's where it gets even more disturbing. He had Anastasia's phone. According to investigators, after murdering his wife, Dmitry used her device to impersonate her online. He replied to her friends' messages pretending to be her. He posted on her social media accounts to make it seem like she was still alive. And he took it even further. He pushed a sale of her online courses. He sold her possessions on marketplace platforms. He was literally profiting off her murder, squeezing every last bit of money he could from her audience while her body decomposed in their apartment. It's unclear what his endgame was. He hadn't made any effort to move the body. Instead, he'd sprayed it with perfume and taped up the vents to mask the smell. He'd even extended the lease on her apartment. Maybe he was buying time to figure out what to do. Maybe he thought he could keep the charade going indefinitely. Let me ask you something. Do you think someone wakes up one day and decides to murder their spouse? Or are there signs, red flags that everyone misses until it's too late? Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think. And make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to dive into Dmitry's defense, and it's absolutely wild. Dmitry's defense was unusual, to put it mildly. He initially claimed that Anastasia had asked him to end her life, that it was a mercy killing, assisted suicide, a final act of love, but prosecutors saw through that immediately. They argued his real motives were jealousy, greed, and control. You see, Dmitry was involved in the adult content world. He'd made his income by creating explicit content with his ex-girlfriends. And when a mutual acquaintance introduced him to rising star Anastasia, he saw dollar signs. He was dating someone else at the time, a woman named Margarita. But behind her back, he lavished Anastasia with attention, gifts, compliments. He bonded with her over their shared love of cars. He wormed his way into her life. They started dating. He began acting as her manager. And soon, Anastasia was featuring in his adult content, which he uploaded to various platforms to generate income. According to friends, Anastasia changed around this time. She became quieter, more isolated. They suspected Dmitry was controlling her, that she couldn't say no to his demands, not to staying home, not to creating increasingly explicit content, not even to marrying him. A few months before her death, Anastasia appeared on a Russian talk show with her mother. The topic was the adult film industry and whether young people were being exploited. Her mother voiced concerns that her daughter was being coerced into making explicit content. She said Anastasia had brought dishonor to the family name. But she also said that Dmitry seemed like a mild-mannered, polite young man. She didn't fear for her daughter's safety. Then, midway through the broadcast, something explosive happened. Dmitry's ex-girlfriend Margarita came forward. She described in detail how Dmitry had beaten her, strangled her, exploited her financially, how he'd controlled every aspect of her life. Dmitry, sitting just feet away, dismissed her claims entirely. He insisted Anastasia could stop filming whenever she wanted, that everything was consensual. And here's the truly disturbing part. Anastasia backed him up. She laughed at Margarita's distress, said she was just acting up for the cameras, that Dmitry had never once hit her, that deep down, she'd always wanted to make adult content. It was all her choice. But was it? Neighbors reported hearing frequent arguments from their apartment. Thuds, crashes, sounds of violence. Many believe Dmitry beat Anastasia the same way he'd beaten Margarita, that her appearance on that talk show was a performance, that she was trapped and too afraid to admit it. Whatever the truth, their relationship deteriorated rapidly. Dmitry moved out, and Anastasia reportedly began spending time with a fellow TikToker named Kirill. She met with him multiple times on the day she died. It's alleged that Dmitry heard about this new friendship, that he arrived at her apartment that fateful August night in a jealous rage. Whether Anastasia let him in or whether he used his old key is unclear. But when he entered the apartment, he saw packed boxes, suitcases. Anastasia was leaving. According to evidence found online, Anastasia had dreamed of opening a tattoo studio in South Korea, a place where Dmitry couldn't follow her. You see, because of his prior convictions for theft and evading military service, Russian law barred him from leaving the country. Prosecutors argued that Dmitry could feel his wife, his sole source of income, slipping away, and he decided that if he couldn't have her, nobody could. The first thing Dmitry did after taking Anastasia's life was message Kirill from her phone. The message was simple: "I never want to see you again." In 2024, the Frunzensky District Court found Dmitry guilty of murder and sentenced him to 8 years in a remote penal colony known as Polar Wolf. The conditions there are said to be nightmarish: sub-zero temperatures, near constant darkness, labor that breaks men. But many people felt his punishment was a slap on the wrist. You know why? Because Russia doesn't typically hand out heavy sentences for murder. Those are reserved for more serious crimes, like criticizing the government. The daytime talk show that had previously hosted Anastasia returned with a special episode sensationalizing her death. After the broadcast, many people mocked Anastasia, questioning why attention was being given to a, quote, worthless adult actress. Others pointed out the hypocrisy that Anastasia's death was being trivialized because of her association with adult content, while the man who killed her was getting off comparatively lightly. Look, Anastasia wasn't a saint. That's clear from her first appearance on the show. But she didn't deserve to be butchered in her own bed simply because she wanted out of a toxic relationship. And here's one final indignation that shows you how messed up this entire situation was. Anastasia's own mother allowed reporters and journalists to film her daughter's funeral in exchange for a fee. Even in death, those closest to her were still profiting off her story. Commenters online said it perfectly. She was exploited in life and exploited in death. We're going to take a sharp turn now, from urban Russia to the highlands of northeastern Brazil. This next case is going to test your stomach. I'm serious. If you're eating, you might want to stop. If you're squeamish, you might want to skip ahead. Because what we're about to discuss involves cannibalism. Real cannibalism. And it's not some ancient historical event. This happened in the 21st century. But before we go there, I need you to do something. Smash that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Now, let's talk about the cannibal cult of Garanhuns. Garanhuns is a city in the highlands of northeastern Brazil. It's known for its mild mountain climate and lively festivals that draw visitors from across the region. To outsiders, it feels traditional, almost wholesome. But behind one unassuming door in this otherwise ordinary city lived a group who believed they were saving the world. One human sacrifice at a time. At the center of this nightmare was Jorge Beltrão Negromonte da Silveira, a failed philosophy student, a martial arts instructor, and a man with a chilling past. Growing up, Jorge had reportedly killed a 17-year-old named Luciano, but was acquitted due to lack of evidence. He later tried to kill his own mother after stealing 80,000 reais from her home. In 1984, he married his future accomplice, Isabel Cristina Pires da Silva. The wedding ceremony was modest, yet moving, though the mood dampened a bit during the reception when Jorge pulled out a knife and threatened to kill all the guests. You know, typical wedding stuff. Surprisingly, they lived a fairly normal life after that. Well, for 2 years at least. In 1986, Jorge met and fell in love with a 16-year-old named Bruna Cristina Oliveira da Silva. Together, Jorge, Isabel, and Bruna formed a bizarre love triangle and lived as a family of sorts, though many have labeled them a small cult built around Jorge's delusions. You see, Jorge displayed clear signs of mental illness. He claimed he'd spoken with angels and cherubs. They'd apparently instructed him to purify the world, to protect the earth from sin and overpopulation. As part of this so-called purification, he told his wives that they had to consume human flesh and sacrifice 4 victims, each representing one of the natural elements: air, earth, water, and fire. Once the 4 killings were completed, he said a portal to paradise would open. The group could ascend to a higher plane of existence, eternal life, spiritual enlightenment. All they had to do was murder and cannibalize 4 people, and unbelievably, Isabel and Bruna believed him. Together, they created what they called the cartel. Their first known victim was 17-year-old Jessica Camila da Silva Pereira. When she met the cartel in 2008, she was a homeless single mother struggling to support her 1-year-old daughter. The cartel opened their arms. They invited Jessica into their home under the pretense of offering her a job. But once inside, Jessica was struck over the head and knocked unconscious. The cultists dragged her into a bathroom where they slit her throat and drained her body of blood. Jessica was then skinned, dismembered, seasoned with salt and cumin, and stored in the fridge. The trio later admitted they'd eaten Jessica's flesh as part of their purification ritual. What makes this even more disturbing is that Jessica's infant daughter was given some of her mother's own meat to eat. The cartel decided to keep the child alive and raise her as their own. To the outside world, they appeared an odd but harmless family, one that supported themselves by selling empadas and coxinhas at the local market, traditional Brazilian pastries. But here's the thing that's going to make your skin crawl. The police would later say that those salty pastries the group sold, the ones their neighbors loved, were often filled with the preserved flesh of their victims. Let that sink in. People were unknowingly eating human meat, buying it from a market stall, taking it home to their families, all while the killers smiled and counted their money. In February 2012, the group cannibalized 31-year-old Giselle Helena da Silva. A few weeks later, on March 15th, they did the same to 20-year-old Alexandra da Silva Falcao. Both were killed in a similar fashion, lured into the cartel's home, struck on the head, stabbed, and then butchered. Though they'd already selected their fourth victim, the group thankfully didn't get to strike again. After their final murder, neighbors began noticing the group's odd behavior. The smell of decay coming from their home, the constant burning of incense, the presence of a small child who never seemed to attend school. But the investigation really began after Giselle's family reported her missing. Witnesses said they'd last seen her entering the cartel's home. CCTV footage showed the group using the victim's credit cards to make purchases in town. Acting on a tip, police searched their property on April 9, 2012. Immediately, Jessica's child, who was now 5 years old, explained how she'd seen her father butcher 2 women. Indeed, in a shallow grave behind the residence, they found human remains belonging to Giselle and Alexandra. Jorge, Isabel, and Bruna were arrested on the spot. The following day, an angry mob of locals set fire to their house. Under questioning, all 3 suspects confessed. They spoke calmly about each incident, claiming they were purging the world of bad people. They even alluded to killing more victims that the police didn't know about. The trio were tried separately for the 3 murders. In 2014, they were convicted for killing Jessica. Jorge received just over 21 years. Isabel and Bruna got 19 years each. In 2018, they were found guilty of killing Giselle and Alexandra. Jorge's sentence rose to around 71 years. Isabel got 68 years. Bruna got 71 years and 10 months. In 2019, their sentences increased again. Jorge by 27 years, his wives by 24. Further appeals and psychiatric evaluations followed. Doctors confirmed Jorge suffered from schizophrenia. He was transferred to a secure psychiatric facility to serve the rest of his time. And here's something that'll make you laugh or scream. I'm not sure which. He's since become the penitentiary's pastor and a published author. He's written 4 books. Oh, and he's now a vegetarian. How thoughtful. As for Jessica's daughter, despite enduring bullying and being called a cannibal repeatedly, she's grown up to be a healthy and well-adjusted young woman, which is honestly a miracle considering what she went through. Now here's something eerie that ties this case to the modern digital age. On the Google Earth Find subreddit, a user named NoFlounder9658 shared a disturbing discovery. Using Street View, they managed to find the exact address where the cannibals used to live. Nowadays, it's concealed behind a metal door. But by chance, the Google car passed by their house in March 2012, right around the time Alexandra was killed and eaten. If you go to that location on Google Street View and click on that specific date, the image changes. A person can be seen entering the home. That person is Isabel, the head chef of the cannibal cult, forever frozen in time on Street View, either just before or just after she served her final pastry. Before we move to our final case, I need you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We're building something special here. A community that isn't afraid to look at the darkest corners of humanity and ask why. Why do people do these things? What breaks in someone's brain that allows them to hurt others? And most importantly, how do we stop it from happening again? Your subscription helps us keep making content that matters. Now let's head to Taiwan for our final story. On the evening of December 9th, 1998, just after 5 in the afternoon, a farmer named Guo was walking home along Faden Road in Taoyuan, Taiwan. The same route he walked every day. Nothing special, just another evening. But then he noticed flames shooting straight up from a remote stretch of brush. The wind carried not just the smell of smoke, but also gasoline and something far worse. Something like burned meat. At first, Guo tried to shrug it off. Mind your own business, he told himself. But curiosity got the better of him. He crept closer and hid behind a stack of dried grass. He saw 4 people standing around a fire, their identities obscured by masks and caps. They were talking in low voices and kept glancing around nervously, like they were worried about being caught. None of them looked like locals, and this stretch of road was the middle of nowhere. So what were they doing lighting a huge gasoline fire? Overcome with dread, Guo tiptoed backward, then ran for home. Along the way, he bumped into his neighbor who'd also seen the fire and had the same bad feeling. Sensing something was wrong, they went straight to Guo's home and called the police. Officers from the nearby substation arrived 30 minutes later. By that point, the 4 fire starters were gone. The responders put out the flames and began examining the charred pile in front of them. It appeared to be a large sack with something heavy inside. They cut it open and gazed upon its contents. Inside was the body of a young woman burned beyond recognition. Her face was gone. Her clothes were mostly incinerated. All that remained was part of a leopard print blouse, a black skirt, and leather ankle boots. On her scorched fingers were 3 rings, 2 gold, 1 amber. Her hands had been tied across her chest, and clutched in her arms was the body of a burned black dog. A few of the officers knew exactly what that symbolized. In rural Taiwanese folklore, a black dog's blood is said to ward off ghosts, to blind a spirit so it can't come back for revenge. Someone had burned this woman with a dog in her arms because they believed her ghost would come looking for them. The police set about trying to identify the Jane Doe. But the forensic doctor could only narrow down the search so much. They determined her cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, that she'd probably been dead less than 24, maybe 48 hours, that she was around 165 centimeters tall, around 25 to 30 years of age, slim, had perfect teeth, and had a 5-centimeter scar on her left wrist. Detectives rummaged through missing persons reports, but found nobody who matched that description. They published the case in newspapers and on TV. Still, no one came forward. With no CCTV in the area and 2 eyewitnesses who couldn't see faces, the case inevitably stalled. And so the woman was buried in Shuanglonglian Cemetery under the name Unidentified Female Fidan Road, Section 4. And for 20 years, that's how she was known. Then in May 2019, a phone rang at the Miauli police station. "I can't take it anymore," said a terrified voice on the other end. "She's been haunting me for over half a year. I want to tell you the truth about a murder from decades ago." The caller identified himself as Yi Hao. He said the unidentified female was a half-Taiwanese, half-Japanese girl named Xia Wen. She was 17 years old and used to work at a betel nut store on Zhongshan Road. The operator asked how he knew that. Yi said he was friends with the store owners, a couple known as Little Pan and Achi, as well as their close associates, Changbi and Wawa. In December 1998, he'd found the 4 of them holding Xia Wen against her will. He hadn't dared report it back then. He was only 15 and feared what the others might do to him. What made him call now, he said, was that half a year earlier, he'd reconnected with one of the group, namely Wawa, also known as Baby. While drinking together, he asked her whatever happened to that girl they'd been holding captive. Baby calmly responded, "Oh, she was burned." After that, Yi Hao kept having nightmares, seeing Xia Wen at night, burned, on top of him, pressing him down, asking why he still hadn't reported what he knew. The dog blood, he said, clearly hadn't worked. Yi Hao's tip was promising, but there was a problem. The forensic doctor had been adamant the victim was between 25 and 30 years old. Back in 1998, Xia Wen was 17. Could the doctor really have made such a big mistake? Detectives decided to pursue this new lead, and to their amazement, they learned that on December 25th, 1998, a man had actually reported his 17-year-old Taiwanese-Japanese daughter missing. Her name was Lin Meijin, but everyone called her Xia Wen. After immigrating from Japan, she'd struggled to adapt to Taiwanese life. Her Mandarin skills weren't up to par, which led to poor grades. Lonely and unhappy, she drifted into the nightlife scene, frequenting clubs and drinking with older men. Her father routinely scolded her for her behavior and admitted to striking her on occasion. This created a rift between them, and in 1996, Xia Wen dropped out of school and moved north to Pingjin. Despite running away from home, she stayed in weekly contact with her father. He reported her missing in 1998 after 2 weeks of radio silence. The name, the age, the dual nationality, the district, the time frame, all the details matched Yi Hao's tip. It began to appear this case could have been resolved decades earlier had detectives not discounted Xia Wen as a possible match due to her age. Feeling embarrassed, detectives decided to compare DNA samples collected at the scene years prior against Xia Wen's father. But at some point, those sample boxes had been thrown out. No matter, they thought. They'd simply exhume the burned woman's grave and take a DNA sample directly. But unbelievably, no one had kept a note of where she was buried. The cemetery had been redeveloped in the intervening years, and the two men who'd handled the burial had since passed away. It looked like they were stuck again. Without hard evidence, Yi Hao's tip was nothing more than a convincing story. But then they got lucky. The forensics office discovered someone had mixed up the 1998 and 1999 sample boxes. That meant the victim's DNA hadn't been thrown out after all. They compared it and got an exact match. The burned woman was indeed 17-year-old Xia Wen. With the victim officially identified and a living witness on record, police moved to arrest the 4 suspects Yi Hao had named. 3 of them were still in Taiwan: Chi, Wawa, and their supposed ringleader, Little Pan. However, the 4th suspect, Chang Bi, had long since fled overseas. Officers debated whether they should pick up the 3 who were still on the island. Doing so would no doubt tip off Chang Bi, and he'd likely never return to face justice. They held off for a year, but ultimately decided catching 3 out of 4 perpetrators wasn't so bad. Little Pan, Chi, and Wawa were all living in completely different areas by that point, leading quiet, unassuming family lives. 3 separate police units picked them up simultaneously and drove them straight to Phaeton Road, Section 4. When they got there, the lead officer asked them, "Do you know who was burned here 2 decades ago?" The officer expected them to say no or throw each other under the bus, but instead, all 3 dropped to their knees and began apologizing to Xia Wen. From there, the full story came out. After running away from home at age 15, Xia Wen drifted into the betel nut shop run by Little Pan, his girlfriend Chi, their friend Chang Bi, and a younger girl nicknamed Wawa. Pan was the de facto leader, and he quickly took a liking to the new runaway. She was cheerful, energetic, eager to please. Before long, he offered her a job as a betel nut beauty, a young, scantily clad woman who attracts customers by sitting in the window or standing on the street. She was an immediate hit with the store's clientele, who referred to her as the Cherry Blossom Girl, a reference to her beauty and heritage. The place wasn't much, but Xia Wen finally felt like she'd found somewhere to belong. Over time, she grew especially close to Chi. At first, they were inseparable, laughing together, sharing food, gossiping. It was the closest thing she'd had to family in months, but the closeness didn't last. Envy and shifting alliances simmered beneath the surface. Chi began to suspect Xia Wen had feelings for Chang Bi. Problem was, so did Wawa. Word spread, jealousy festered, and Wawa made it her mission to teach that snake a lesson. With the help of a few friends, she pinned Xia Wen down, beat her, and shaved her head. Humiliated and distressed, Xia Wen called up her father. Through floods of tears, she said she needed money for a wig. But instead of offering sympathy, her father reprimanded her for getting involved with such lowlifes and hung up. He would later deeply regret that he didn't act more appropriately, because he never knew it would be the last time he'd ever speak with his daughter. On December 6, 1998, Little Pan realized money was coming up short. Someone, he said, was skimming from the register. Wawa immediately accused Xia Wen of stealing from the business, saying she'd used the money to buy expensive jewelry and wigs. And in Little Pan's volatile mind, that checked out. In a violent rage, He dragged the 17-year-old into a room above the store, tied her up, and locked her inside. And so began Xia Wen's 72 hours of hell. From then on, Pan declared that Xia Wen was the store's punching bag. Whenever anyone felt in a bad mood, he said they were welcome to go upstairs and beat her. And all 4 of them did, repeatedly, with fists and sticks. The atmosphere only became more sadistic as the night wore on. On December 7th, things continued to spiral. The group denied Xia Wen food and water, sliced her face and thighs with a machete, beat her with a baseball bat, all while trying to force a confession out of her about the missing cash. But her condition had deteriorated rapidly overnight. She could barely speak in her own defense. That's when little Pan started to panic. He was a regular amphetamine user, and he feared Xia Wen would tell the police about his drug addiction. As an active duty soldier partway through his mandatory national service, little Pan knew that if he was reported, he'd be tried in a military court and face an extremely severe punishment. On December 8th, his paranoia peaked, and he decided Xia Wen had to be silenced permanently. The other 3 agreed to go along with Pan's plan. After all, they were already in deep. There was just one problem. While they deliberated about how to finish her off, the aforementioned Yi Hao arrived unannounced and came face to face with the 4 soon-to-be killers and their tied-up, soon-to-be victim. When the group noticed Yi Hao, they surrounded him and ordered him to hurt Xia Wen, technically making him an accomplice. He fled the scene the first chance he got and didn't speak about what he'd seen for 21 long years. After he left, the group decided to act before any other witnesses turned up. In the early hours of December 9th, Chi took thin sheets of joss paper, wetted them, and layered them over Xia Wen's face, blocking her airflow. When she was on the verge of losing consciousness, Chang Bi held her legs while Pan wrapped a towel around her neck. He inserted a stick and twisted until her cervical spine snapped. All the while, Baby stood by the door, acting as lookout. She now knew what would happen if the others ever discovered the truth, that she was the one skimming money from the register, not Xia Wen. After taking Xia Wen's life, the perpetrators brought in a mystic who performed folk rites, a woman known only as Hu. Rather than call the police, she advised them to kill a black dog and sprinkle its blood over the corpse, not just to blind the victim's spirit so she couldn't find and haunt them, but so the animal would carry their sin into the afterlife, leaving them free of guilt, both in this world and the next. They followed the mystic's advice. After driving Xia Wen out to Feidan Road and setting the fire, the group immediately dissolved the betel nut stand, scattered in different directions, and cut all contact with one another. 21 years later, 3 of those perpetrators were finally in court in a trial which began just 45 days before the statute of limitations would have expired. Despite their past confessions and expressions of remorse in front of the judge, they all pled not guilty and tried to pass the blame, each saying they only watched as the others killed Xia Wen. At first, the judge gave the 2 main offenders, Little Pan and Chi, life sentences. Baby, who was just a juvenile at the time of the incident, got 14 years and 10 months. However, on appeal, the court said the offenders had all been young, impulsive, and still reformable at the time of the crime, and cut the main sentences to 14 years and 6 months. According to some reports, babies was also reduced to 14 years and 2 months. Xia Wen's father got nothing. His civil claim was rejected, and his daughter's remains, buried under the name unidentified female, were never located for a proper funeral. He told the media he regretted not being a better father. If he had been, he said, Xia Wen would still be alive. He passed away in 2023, still angry and full of guilt. It's crazy to think this case could have been resolved much earlier had the forensics team not been so adamant about the victim's age. It's even crazier that it was finally resolved because a witness waited 21 years to pick up the phone, all because he said he was being haunted by a ghost and couldn't sleep anymore. And it's just infuriating that the perpetrators are serving such short sentences, with one of them getting away scot-free. Xia Wen may finally have her name back, but she still hasn't been given the justice she deserves. So there you have it. 4 disturbing region-locked cases that most people outside those countries have never heard of. A truck driver who murdered a teenage girl because the math told him to. A Russian influencer killed by the husband who saw her as nothing but a product. A cannibal cult in Brazil that fed human flesh to unsuspecting customers, and a teenage girl in Taiwan tortured to death over stolen money she never took. These cases share a common thread. They all involve systems that failed, legal systems that create perverse incentives, social systems that don't protect the vulnerable, justice systems that let killers walk away with slaps on the wrist, and most disturbingly, they all involve people who calculated the value of human life and decided it wasn't worth much. Before you go, I need you to do 3 things. First, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this content reach more people who need to hear these stories. Second, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And third, drop a comment telling me which case shocked you the most. Or better yet, tell me about a region-locked case from your own country that the world should know about. These stories matter. These victims matter. And the only way to prevent future tragedies is to shine a light on the systems that allowed them to happen in the first place. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.